Because the sky is blue, it makes me cry. Because the sky is blue.
Welcome to the Beau Show. Any Beatles fan will know my opening song, Because. It was the final song recorded on the Abbey Road album, written by John Lennon. It was recorded in the first week of August in 1969, so that would be right around this exact time, 52 years ago. Kind of hard to believe half a century has passed since this song was recorded. Now, in my version, I did this totally a cappella, for a reason. The Beatles released an a cappella version in their Anthology 3 version, where they wanted to just isolate the vocals. And I was inspired both by that recording as well as the version that was done for the film Across the Universe, which is all Beatles music. They took a very modern approach in that film, and they do actually a really good job with incorporating all of the Beatles music with, certain historical events such as Vietnam and the Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix era as well. It's a cool film. But the musical purity of the song is what I want to focus upon. And for what it's worth, it was very challenging for me, even as a classically trained musician, to recreate what the Beatles did in that recording. And I'll focus on why that is in just a little bit. But the Beatles producer, George Martin, not to be confused with the Beatle, George Harrison, was highly influential in the Beatles' sound. On the Abbey Road recording in 1969, Lennon carried the lead vocal and guitar, McCartney on harmony and bass, and Harrison on harmony and Moog synthesizer, and George Martin on the electric spinet Baldwin harpsichord. The song was inspired by Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. You all know that one, right? So on and so on. Yoko Ono, married to Lennon, was a classically trained pianist and was playing the Adagio sostenuto part of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata one day, just like I demonstrated, and John asked her to play the chords backwards, and thus wrote Because as a riff on Moonlight Sonata backwards. Something similar happened with another one of my big musical influences, Billy Joel, when he wrote the song This Night, based off of Beethoven's Pathétique Sonata. The fact that George Martin added the harpsichord to this recording is intentional in making it more classical sounding, likely a nod to Beethoven. Now, as for the meaning of this song, John says the following of the lyrics. He says, "The lyrics speak for themselves. They're clear. No BS, no imagery, no obscure references. The Beatles certainly got to a point musically where some of their songs were pretty wild, both sonically and lyrically, especially as perhaps maybe the drugs kicked in. I think of Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite and I Am the Walrus as examples. Those are just bizarre. But Because is a little esoteric. Because the world is round, it turns me on. I've never been turned on by the world being round, but John was. But also that phrase, turns me on, was used in the Beatles' 1967 song, A Day in the Life. And it caused some controversy. But this was '69, and the phrase did not stir up the same amount of controversy. Times had changed. And when it was suggested that these phrases like turns me on and blows my mind were passé, Paul McCartney retorted, well, it's passé to say, you blow my mind, baby honey bunch, but the way John wrote it, rather, is beautiful. I agree with him. Because the wind is high, it blows my mind. Now, that one's very ambiguous. Is he talking about being high on drugs, or just that the wind is so high that it blows his mind? How about love is old, love is new, love is all, love is you? That one can really hit home. Love is all, love is you. We think of love as a verb, I love you. But love personified, that love is not an emotion, but the embodiment of a person. You know, that's some powerful stuff right there. And what was the Beatles show in Las Vegas called? The Cirque du Soleil one? Love. Because the sky is blue, it makes me cry. Now, when I see a blue sky, I feel immense joy. But I can imagine a sky so blue that it could make you cry, creating an almost euphoric tears from the beauty of it. I've seen skies like that in Utah and Colorado. And when you're up 14,000 feet, it's this crystal, radiant blue that isn't harmed by pollution and city life. It's like when you see stars out in the wilderness. They're just bigger and brighter. For John to say there is no obscurity and no references, I have to take him at face value. Paul actually has added that he thinks Yoko had a hand in it too, just because of how earthy Yoko is. And they were staying at that time at Ringo's place. George Harrison said this about the song, quote, Paul usually writes the sweeter tunes, and John writes the sort of more rave-up things or the freakier things. But John's getting to where he doesn't want to. He just wants to write 12 bars. But you can't deny it. I think this is possibly my favorite one on the album. The lyrics are so simple. The harmony was pretty difficult to sing. We had to really learn it. But I think that's one of the tunes that will impress most people. It's really good, end quote. And by the way, I can attest to George, the harmony is very difficult to sing. What I had to do to recreate this in the absence of sheet music was to listen to each part on its own and copy it all the way through without listening to the other parts. Because it's not like a typical song where you can just like lay down the melody and then you add the third or the fifth around it. John's melody is so atypical that it follows its own course. And I had to sing it first, and then I did Paul's part, which is more decorative. And the hardest part actually for me was George's part. It's kind of the anchor. I had to do that one last. The Beatles recorded each of their parts 3 times. So you get a stack of 9 voices, but there's only 3-part harmony. So George did his 3 times, John 3 times, and Paul 3 times. All of them did this perfectly together. They had to do it perfectly due to the limitations of the tracks that can be recorded. They had only 8 tracks that day. Even for the Beatles, that was no easy feat. The vocal stacking gives it a fuller sound, more than just like a trio. And then you throw in some reverb and you get this really dreamy sound. It took them 5 hours to get these vocals right because the voices were being recorded all on just one track. Jeff Emmerich, the engineer that day, had to mix the guys in real time. He had to move the faders up and down with their dynamics because they weren't using compressors or limiters. They wanted to keep the sound as pure as humanly possible. And apparently, this took great precision. And another thing that is really difficult from the musical perspective is the phrasing. That's basically a term that has nothing to do with the pitch, but the way the story is told and making sure you begin and end each word together. Great singers are great at phrasing. They are essentially speaking the song over music. They are great storytellers. And this took an unusual amount of patience to get the song right. And at one point, even John became a bit exasperated by saying, "Give me a break. I wish I hadn't written the bloody thing." Now, I did this all a cappella, so I didn't have the guitars or the harpsichord backing track to help me through it when I did this. But when I listened back to it with it all stacked together, I was actually a bit surprised it sounded right. And like the Beatles, I didn't use auto-tune to help me correct any pitch. It is what it is, and there's mistakes in it, I'm sure. And the melody changes so much that you are constantly having to move around to accommodate it. It gave me tremendous appreciation for what they did. Also, they had Ringo there. He did hand claps in their headphones so that they could just have a pulse to keep time. These days, you would just use a click track to do that. And the harpsichord gave it that very Baroque sound, probably a nod to Beethoven. And the writing style is very earthy, and that's definitely got to be Yoko's influence. The Beatles taped 23 takes of this track. Take 16 was selected as the best. George Martin duplicated every note that John played on guitar with the harpsichord, so they're playing duplicates. There was nothing really for Ringo to do, but they did need the timing to be meticulous with the doubling of those parts. so Ringo had to help him keep time. The guys also had to sing the song all the way through, so there was no punching in, as they call it, where you can go back and you can, fix one note, one line, even one word or one note. They had to be perfect all the way through, and that's what music today is lacking. The Beatles were perfectly imperfect. Today's musicians are lazy and they just punch in and out and they use pitch correction. Not many can do what the Beatles do in this song. Another interesting element to the song is that it almost sounds unfinished to me. Listen to the end of it. See how it kind of remains unresolved? And that's also a testament to the title of it, Because. Kind of like when you hear someone ask you, hey, why did you do this or why did you do that? And you reply, because. See that unsettledness of that? So I think John intended it that way to leave it unsettled, as though other questions will be asked. This song is the last song in the Lennon-McCartney era as a songwriting duo. It is their last contribution on their last album. And even though an era of two of music's greatest songwriters had ended, isn't it interesting how the end of Because has that unfinished, unresolved quality to it? It's as though the Beatles never really ended. And in many ways, that's true, because their music and this song live on. Now, I want to isolate each part just for a minute so you can see how independent these lines are. They work seamlessly together, but as individual parts, they sound almost strange, and it's really hard to memorize them. So, here's John's part. Because the world is round, it turns me on. Now, here's Paul's. Because the world is round, it turns me on. Now, here's George's. Because the world is round, it turns me on. It's a well-oiled machine when it works together, isn't it? There's a certain ethereal, otherworldly beauty to it, in the way that these individual parts just blend together. The way the Beatles blended as four musicians. And even though Ringo isn't on the track, he was still there, keeping time and lending his moral support. As a musician, I can tell you that there is never a quality so rewarding as recording and making music. It's why Beethoven and Bach and Mozart and so many others considered music to be divine and wrote many religious songs as a way of dialing into the heavens and even God himself. Music is transformative. Now, as for the harmony itself in this song, this was George Martin's forte. And while they labored over the piano trying to figure out what the harmonies would be, John was basically saying, what's an alternative to a third or a fifth? And they would pick those alternates. A third and a fifth are usually the most common harmonies found in a chord. It's the tonic note, the third, and the fifth. That's the most typical way to do it. But they found these nuanced harmonies that worked together. George Martin said, quote, "That day I saw the four Beatles at their finest. There was 100% concentration from all of them. Even Ringo, sitting quietly with his eyes closed, silently urging his bandmates on to their best performance. All working in tandem to get that vocal nailed, spot on. It was a stark example of the kind of teamwork that had been so sorely lacking for years. It's tempting to imagine what the Beatles might have been able to accomplish if they could only have captured and sustained that spirit just a little longer." End quote. Because was the first song to have the Moog synthesizer on it as well. It was used subtly. It comes in right when the song changes from minor into a major key in the bridge, right here.
Love is old, love is new. Love is all, love is you.
That brings a whole new dimension to the song, and it transitions into this happier feeling where they sing about love, and then of course they go back to the ethereal. The song is only 2 minutes and 45 seconds long, but in its simplicity, it stands out. It's also a song that both music nerds like myself and your everyday listener can love and appreciate. The song has a certain quality that affects people. I think it's one of their best. Having been in an a cappella group when I was younger, you realize the full dimensionality that voices have when they blend together. No one really does that anymore. Fleetwood Mac did it, the Doobie Brothers, Chicago, the Eagles, Little Big Town. But nowadays, rarely. When I think about the painstaking amount of time that the Beatles took to create this and get it right, it pains me to think about what passes for music today. Cardi B, that's not music. A lot of stuff today is just a looped beat with some cursing or some overproduced garbage. These guys put their talent and sweat into this song and this album. And it's why we still revere them to this very day. The 60s certainly were a decade of some of the world's finest music. These were true masters of their craft. In addition, and I will tie this to our current culture, the lyrics were written creatively. Today we have lyrics that are either trite or colloquialisms that people just repeat so that they can sound like, I don't know, they're part of a cool clique. More a measure, honestly, of conformity than anything else. I've made the reference to TikTok in previous episodes. It's like they just clone each other. But music is supposed to be what happens when words can say no more. And when you get this beautiful symbiosis of words and music that dance with each other and harmonies that sway and play, you create something magical. If we had more people doing that on TikTok, I might actually sign up. But nowadays, DJs just find a beat that people can dance to, and that passes as music. And then when I hear what everyone is singing in these songs, God, it makes me cringe. We are not rising to the occasion, culturally speaking. We aren't aiming high. In fact, we're aiming low towards the abyss. I'm grateful that, I listen to the music that my parents listened to, and that my mom put me in classical piano lessons about age 4. It gave me certainly a good ear, but also an appreciation for what good music is. We are cultural knuckle draggers right now. We aren't elevating. And while it's true that everyone cannot be a leader, I get it, at least we can give the followers something worthy of following. Think of the musical and cultural boundaries that the Beatles pushed. They were influenced by their times and era, but they also influenced their time and era. They shaped it. Cirque du Soleil created a Vegas show from it. Commercials use the music to sell products. I would hate for our youngest generation to grow up without the Beatles. But there's no question that they will not be as affected by them the way that older generations were. It has a diminishing return. So I think because speaks to us right now. It sings to us. It's the end of one of the greatest songwriting duos of all time, but it's also the beginning of something. The end of that song leaves the door open, an invitation for more songwriters and singers to continue the legacy and make more great music. Maybe the Beatles wrote because as a way of saying, because you fill in the blank. It's up to us to fill in the blank. They've written the song, now we have to continue it.